Now, of course, under the new regulations, that they can essentially share it with anybody they want to, as long as they use the correct terminology to share it. And so they could easily share it with the Department of Labor, with the Department of Health and Human Services, which would be helpful. You've got Obamacare going in, so you know the IRS will be in control of that, so that's comforting. And the U.S. Department of Education, even though they will protest vigorously that they are not trying to establish a national student database, but everything that they are doing, and there are multiple initiatives which I won't get into, but there are multiple things that they are funding that are all designed to make sharing easier across state lines and among states and the federal government. There's another initiative out there that I also won't get into because New Hampshire right now is not in it, but you may be aware of it. It's called InBloom. You might have heard of InBloom. That's another initiative that is funded by, surprise, Bill Gates Foundation. That the idea is, it says it was inspired by the vision of the Council of Chief State School Officers. That's one of the owners of the Common Core standards. And it intends to develop technology to support the implementation of the Common Core standards. So InBloom, the idea in InBloom is that the states would upload all their student data into this big Gates-funded cloud, and then various stakeholders could use the data for various things. There were 9 pilot states. New Hampshire was not one of them, so that's good. Also, because there's been so much parental outrage about this, that the members, the original members, they're all dropping like flies. Everybody's trying to scramble to get out of it because their parents are so upset. But, okay, they also tell you that, well, don't worry about it because all of this data that are being passed around among these various stakeholders are anonymized data. We strip out the names and we give them unique student identifiers. Well, in the first place, all of you who work in IT, I hear laughing at that. In the first place, it is not true that it's going to be anonymized. If it's going to the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium, they know who the students are. It's just not true to say that that would be anonymized. But even in other areas, essentially in this era of big data, there is no such thing as anonymization. When there are multiple and maybe hundreds of data points on an individual, you can find out who that is. The lack of a name is an annoyance. It's not an obstacle. They can match the data. They've done this back as far as long ago as 1999 in Kentucky. There was a researcher who was trying to match two lists of students of thousands, like 2,300 students, who took different tests, and it was all anonymized, and he was able to match them with 100% accuracy. And this was in 1999, before they were collecting all the things that they're collecting now. So if data are useful, if they're detailed enough that they are useful, the anonymization is essentially impossible. So where are we headed with all this? One way to think about this and to figure out what the future holds is to look at what the U.S. Department of Education is working on and writing about. And here's a report. This is actually only part of it. I don't want to haul the whole thing up here from Georgia. This is called Promoting Grit, Tenacity, and Perseverance, Critical Factors for Success in the 21st Century. This is from U.S. Department of Education, Office of Educational Technology, and this came out in February of 2013. Now, this report talks about how we have got to start measuring these non-cognitive things with students, not just their knowledge of Hamlet or their knowledge of this or their knowledge of that, because as Dr. Stosky said, Common Core is really not that concerned about knowledge. It's concerned about skills. And when they talk about skills, this is what they're talking about. Whether you work with other people, you collaborate with other people, what is your leadership, all these other non-cognitive things. So this report talks about all of those things that are necessary for success in the government foreseen future and how you measure it. So I encourage you, don't go on their website because I'm not sure that it's there, but if you Google grit, tenacity, and perseverance, it'll come up. It's like 100 and something pages. And start reading on page 41 and go through about page 46 because it tells you how you measure these things. Well, how do you measure it? Well, primarily through physiological reactions that students have to stimuli such as frustration, annoyance, boredom, that sort of thing. And they say that to do that, you could measure the reactions through posture analysis Skin conductance sensors, that's where you wrap something around the wrist and measure things. EEG brainwave patterns, and eye tracking. And if you go to page 44, they will show you pictures of these devices that they use. And the report barely mentions, in 100 and whatever pages of this report, they barely mention what an appalling intrusion this is into privacy. They do mention it, but it's not a big deal. What they are really concerned about is that these measurement devices and processes are not practical for the classroom yet. So I'm not telling you that once your kids start taking the Smarter Balance test in 2014, 2015, that they're going to be hooked up to these things and that's going to happen. No, it's not going to happen that quickly. But this is where we're going. This is what they're putting on their website. So if they don't consider this the future, why are they spending many hundreds of thousands of dollars promoting these things? And they also specifically say in this report that they draw a direct line to the Common Core standards because they note that the math standards expressly require perseverance in struggling through problems. So if the standards require it, then you have to measure it, right? There's another report that came out that I won't go into great detail about the same time, came out of the same office, and it was about data and how the way we're going to get all of this data on students is not just forms they fill out, it's through the digital learning. It's through, when I say digital learning, I'm not talking about just having a great lecture online or your Kindle is now it's on a screen rather than on paper. I'm talking about the things that are interactive, that you have a stimulus and response, and like Pavlov, you put the kid in front of the computer and he has to respond to different things that come up. That kind of digital learning generates just enormous quantities of data. It's called data exhaust. And that report urges that this be used to develop individual profiles on students, that this data be shared, these profiles be shared with other stakeholders, with various institutions. And for studying, I'll read this to you, for studying the non-cognitive aspects of 21st century skills, namely interpersonal skills, such as communication, collaboration, and leadership, and intrapersonal skills, such as persistence and self-regulation. The department emphasizes that the gathering of this extremely fine-grained information on students will help with the implementation of the Common Core standards, which of course promote deeper learning objectives rather than academic knowledge. Now, about a year ago, the U.S. Department of Education hosted something that they call Data Palooza. You can't make this stuff up. And the CEO of one technology company was there, and he talked about all of this just wonderful horizons for these companies, that they get all this data on students, on all of these non-cognitive skills, and he said, we are collecting billions of records of data, pulling data from everywhere, tens of thousands of places. He said this data will help develop the 21st century skills that the government has, I added that myself, has determined that people need. And so how are these 21st century skills going to be developed in the classroom? Well, he said Common Core is the glue that ties everything together. Now, I haven't even mentioned the problem of hacking, just straight old data security. This is going to be a huge problem. We know that this is going to be a disaster because these data pools have so much data on students. They have pristine social security numbers in there, so they're a very tempting target for people who have malign motives. But as serious as that problem is, to my way of thinking, the greater problem is the philosophy behind this, that our children are human capital to be analyzed and examined, and this is the kind of thing that the progressive education people have wanted to do for years, for over a century really, and now they have the technology to do it. And because Common Core so closely aligns with what they want to do, which is skills rather than knowledge, this is the passport. This is the way they're going to do it. So thank you.
Croc TV.